Grandpa loved the quiet mornings in his small suburban neighborhood. Every day he would wake up early, put on his old brown slippers, and walk outside with his mug of tea. The sun was just rising, casting a golden light over the neatly trimmed lawns and the flowers he had spent years planting. Birds chirped in the trees, and there was a soft hum of life as the neighborhood slowly woke up. He enjoyed these moments of peace, sitting on the wooden bench in his garden, watching the world slowly come alive. It was his time, a moment to breathe, reflect, and appreciate all the years he had lived in the same house, the same street, and the same community. This morning, however, something felt off. As he sipped his tea and let the warmth spread through his hands, he noticed a car parked on his driveway. Grandpa frowned, squinting through the sunlight. He knew every car in the neighborhood. This one was different. The paint was shiny, and it looked new. The license plate didn't belong to any of his neighbors. It wasn't just parked casually at the curb. No, it was right on his driveway, blocking the path to the garage. Grandpa's mind immediately registered the situation. Someone was trespassing on his property, and he didn't like it one bit. He slowly stood up, his knees cracking as he stretched. He put down his mug and walked toward the driveway. The grass felt soft under his slippers, and the scent of freshly watered flowers filled the air. He reached the edge of the driveway and called out, "Excuse me, sir? That's private property." His voice was firm but polite, the kind that commanded attention without shouting. The man inside the car didn't respond. Grandpa could see him through the windshield, fiddling with his phone and completely ignoring the warning. Grandpa's frown deepened. He had dealt with many people over the years, but someone blatantly ignoring signs and basic respect for property was unacceptable. He knew he had to do something, but he didn't want to rush into anger. Grandpa had always believed in thinking before acting. He observed the man closely. The driver seemed young, confident, and maybe even a little arrogant. He had a look that said he didn't care about other people's boundaries. Grandpa shook his head. He had faced people like this before, but each time he had found a way to handle the situation without losing his cool. He walked back to the porch, muttering under his breath. He could feel the blood pressure rising slightly, but he reminded himself to stay calm. He picked up the phone, thinking about calling the police. But then he paused. Calling authorities could make things complicated. It could take hours for anyone to show up, and in that time the man could leave, or worse, cause damage. Grandpa didn't like relying on others to fix problems that he could handle himself. He wanted a solution that was quick, fair, and memorable for the person who had crossed the line. Grandpa went back to the driveway, this time standing closer to the car. He noticed the man still didn't acknowledge him. He tried again, this time raising his voice slightly. "Sir, I'm asking you politely. You cannot park here. This is private property." The man finally looked up, eyes narrowing for a brief moment, but then he shrugged and went back to his phone. That was the moment Grandpa realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. This man was intentionally disregarding rules and boundaries. Grandpa's mind began to race. He had a reputation in the neighborhood for being clever and fair. Over the years, he had faced many challenges: noisy neighbors, mischievous kids, even a few people who tried to cut corners in ways that affected the community. And every time, Grandpa had found a way to solve problems without unnecessary confrontation. This situation was no different. He didn't want to be harsh or angry. He wanted to teach a lesson that would stay with this person, a lesson about respect and common sense. He went back to the porch and sat down for a moment, thinking carefully. He noticed his neighbors were starting to come out of their houses, curious about the car blocking the driveway. Some were smiling politely, others shaking their heads, muttering about how people had no respect these days. Grandpa waved at them, letting them know he had everything under control. He didn't want anyone to intervene or escalate the situation unnecessarily. This was something he could handle on his own terms. As he sipped his tea again, Grandpa began to plan. He thought about harmless but effective ways to show the man that parking on someone else's property was not acceptable. He remembered the tricks he had used in the past, clever ways to inconvenience people just enough to make them think twice, without causing harm or breaking any rules. He smiled faintly, already picturing how the man would react when the lesson came. It would be quick, memorable, and fair. Grandpa liked teaching lessons that left a mark without leaving anger. He also considered the possibility that the man might argue or get defensive. Grandpa had a plan for that too. He would stay calm, polite, and firm. He would explain clearly that this was private property and that respect was not optional. If the man continued to ignore the rules, there were still ways to make the lesson stick without causing trouble. Grandpa had dealt with difficult people before, and he trusted his instincts. The minutes passed slowly, the morning sun climbing higher in the sky. The man in the car seemed oblivious to the tension building around him. Grandpa noticed the small details, the way the man's phone rested on the dashboard, the slight tapping of his fingers on the steering wheel, the occasional glance out of the window. Every detail helped Grandpa understand the kind of person he was dealing with. He wasn't reckless, not exactly. He was careless and confident, someone who believed he could bend the world around him without consequences. Grandpa knew that confidence could be corrected. With the right approach, Grandpa took a deep breath, enjoying the smell of the flowers and the fresh morning air. He reminded himself that patience was key. Anger could cloud judgment, but calm observation could turn any situation into a lesson. He glanced at the car again, then at the small chalk markings he had made around the edges of the driveway for guidance. He smiled to himself. Today would be a day the man would not forget, and it would be done in a way that was fair, clever, and respectful. The family slowly began to come out of the house, sensing that something unusual was happening. Grandpa explained the situation briefly, keeping his voice calm and steady. Everyone agreed that calling the police could wait. They trusted Grandpa's judgment. He had a plan, and they knew it would work. It was part of the reason why everyone in the neighborhood respected him so much. Grandpa didn't just react. He thought, observed, acted in a way that taught lessons without creating unnecessary drama. The man in the car finally started the engine, but instead of moving, he stayed there, still absorbed in his phone. Grandpa realized that this was the perfect moment. He could let the man settle into a false sense of comfort, thinking he had one, before delivering the lesson in a way that would be impossible to ignore. He adjusted his hat, took another sip of tea, and prepared himself for the moment of action. Grandpa had faced many challenges in life. Situations like this were satisfying in a unique way. They allowed him to use his intelligence, patience, and sense of justice. He was not angry. He was ready. The man had made a mistake, and Grandpa was about to ensure he understood it completely. The quiet morning had transformed into a stage for a small but meaningful act of fairness, one that would leave the neighborhood talking and the man humbled. And so, Grandpa sat back, watching the man, planning every step carefully, enjoying the stillness of the morning before the lesson began. The birds continued to sing. The sun climbed higher. The neighborhood held its breath, waiting to see how Grandpa would handle the intruder on his property. One thing was certain. The man would not forget this day, and neither would anyone who witnessed it. Grandpa's mind was sharp, his plan ready, and his sense of justice unwavering. The morning had just begun, and a lesson in respect was about to unfold in the quiet suburban street. In the way only Grandpa could make it memorable. Grandpa went back inside his house after observing the man in the car for a while. He could feel his heart calm as he sipped the now slightly cooler tea. He knew that rushing into confrontation would solve nothing, and planning carefully was the key. The rest of the family had started coming out, curious about the car blocking the driveway. His son, daughter-in-law, and a few grandchildren came out onto the porch, looking concerned but trusting Grandpa's judgment. They had seen him handle difficult situations many times, and they knew he preferred clever solutions to arguments or anger. Grandpa invited them to sit down with him in the living room. He explained everything calmly, his voice steady and patient. He described how the car had appeared, how the man had ignored his polite requests, and how this was clearly not a mistake. The family listened intently, their faces showing concern, but also a certain fascination. Grandpa had a way of making ordinary situations feel like a story, one where lessons would be learned and justice would be served without unnecessary conflict. He suggested that calling the police could be a last resort, but they should first try to solve this themselves. "We don't want to make things worse," he said. "But we also need to make sure the man understands he cannot just park on our property and ignore the rules." The grandchildren whispered to each other, excited by the idea of seeing Grandpa handle the situation. They remembered stories from the past where he had used clever methods to teach lessons without anyone getting hurt. It was part of what made him so respected in the neighborhood. Grandpa began discussing different options. He talked about ways to make the driveway less attractive for the intruder. It's like placing harmless obstacles that would slow him down or guide him away. He considered putting up more visible signs, but he wanted something that would have a stronger impact. The family suggested calling or talking to the man directly, but Grandpa shook his head. This wasn't a matter of simple conversation. The man had already ignored polite requests. It was time for a strategy that would make him understand respect in a practical way. They decided to observe the man's habits. Grandpa noted the times he usually parked and how long he stayed. He suggested keeping a log, recording license plate details, and even noting small things like the way the man handled the car. The family joined in with interest, each taking small notes and observations. It felt like a small detective game. But the goal was serious: to teach a lesson without causing harm or creating unnecessary conflict. Grandpa reminded everyone that the focus should be on fairness and clever problem-solving, not revenge or anger. As they discussed, Grandpa noticed the neighbors were watching from across the street. Some were smiling, some frowning. He waved to them, assuring them that the situation was under control. He didn't want anyone interfering because that could complicate things. Grandpa had always believed that problems are best solved calmly and with strategy. He encouraged the family to trust his experience and patience. Over the next few days, the family began quietly preparing. Grandpa instructed his grandchildren to help him with minor tasks like organizing small markers on the driveway and noting positions of cones and garden tools that could be used creatively. They all worked together, enjoying the process. It was not just about teaching the man a lesson, but also about spending time together as a family, learning how to handle difficult situations responsibly. Grandpa explained that planning and observation are more powerful than anger, and this situation was a perfect example. Grandpa also reflected on the kind of lesson he wanted to deliver. It couldn't be harsh or humiliating, he thought. It had to be clever, fair, and memorable. He wanted the man to realize that actions have consequences, but in a way that he would remember without bitterness. He discussed ideas with the family about using gentle humor and harmless challenges, ways that would guide the man to understand respect. Grandpa believed that teaching through experience often left a stronger impression than simply giving a lecture. During this time, the man continued parking on the driveway. He didn't seem to notice the subtle changes and preparations being made. Grandpa took this as confirmation that patience was key. He watched carefully from the window, noting the man's habits, continued explaining the importance of observation and timing to his grandchildren. He emphasized that understanding human behavior was essential in dealing with difficult people. The family was learning not just how to handle this situation, but valuable lessons about patience, fairness, and strategic thinking. One afternoon, Grandpa went outside to measure distances and check where obstacles could be placed without causing any damage. He explained to his grandchildren how planning was essential and how small details could have a big effect. They placed harmless objects, like small cones, strategically around the driveway and set up visual markers that would guide the man without creating danger. Grandpa explained that the key was to create a situation where the man would naturally realize his mistake and change his behavior. Meanwhile, Alebos continued to watch quietly. Some whispered among themselves, curious about what Grandpa had planned. His reputation had always been one of cleverness and fairness. So many expected a creative solution rather than a confrontation. Grandpa knew the neighborhood would be talking about this, and he was fine with that. He wanted the lesson to be memorable not just for the man, but as a reminder to the community that respect is important. The family practiced patience. Grandpa reminded them that success wouldn't come immediately. It required careful observation and the right timing. They discussed possible reactions from the man, including anger or frustration, and planned how to respond calmly. Grandpa wanted to ensure that no one would act impulsively, that every action was deliberate and fair. The children found this process fascinating. learning from Grandpa's wisdom and calm demeanor during the evenings. Grandpa would sit on the porch and plan the next day's actions. He made small sketches of the driveway and marked where obstacles could be placed safely. He explained to his family that the plan had to be flexible because the man's reactions were unpredictable. The key, Grandpa said, was to balance creativity with safety and firmness with fairness. It was a delicate balance, but one he had mastered over the years. The family discussed how they could help without being seen as part of the lesson. Grandpa suggested they remain mostly inside, but be ready to support if needed. He emphasized that the man needed to understand respect without feeling attacked. The plan was to make him uncomfortable in a gentle, clever way that would make the point without creating resentment. Grandpa's approach was thoughtful and humane. It's focused on teaching rather than punishing. As the days passed, the man became a little more bold, parking earlier or leaving for longer periods. Grandpa observed silently, noting every detail. He explained to the family that this behavior confirmed the man's need for a strong, memorable lesson. Grandpa's experience taught him that people often learn best when they face small but meaningful challenges. This was exactly what the family had been preparing for. They knew that soon the moment would come to deliver the lesson, and it would be unforgettable. Grandpa also shared stories from his past with the family, examples of how clever strategies had solved problems without anger or conflict. The children were captivated, and the adults nodded in agreement. They began to understand the wisdom behind patience, observation, and strategic action. Grandpa emphasized that respect is earned through consistent behavior, and those who ignore rules need guidance that makes them reflect on their actions. Finally, the preparations were complete. Every obstacle, every marker, every minor detail had been carefully planned. Grandpa felt a sense of calm satisfaction. He knew that when the moment came, the lesson would be delivered perfectly. The family felt confident as well, trusting Grandpa's judgment and experience. They had learned valuable lessons about patience, observation, and thoughtful action. The stage was set for the man to learn respect in a way he would never forget, and the neighborhood would witness a clever, fair resolution to a problem that could have caused unnecessary conflict. Grandpa woke up early that morning, feeling a mix of excitement and calm determination. Today was the day he had been preparing for. The plan he had crafted over the past several days was ready, every small detail carefully thought out. He brewed a fresh cup of tea, enjoying the familiar warmth and aroma that always seemed to sharpen his mind. He sat quietly on the porch, taking in the morning sunlight and listening to the sounds of the neighborhood waking up. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, as if even the birds knew something was about to happen. He glanced at the driveway, where the car had appeared again, parked boldly on his property. The man inside seemed confident, as if he believed he could ignore rules without consequence. Grandpa smiled faintly. He had seen this kind of confidence before, and he knew exactly how to handle it. Today the man would learn a lesson in respect and awareness, but it would be delivered in a way that was clever and fair. Grandpa's mind went over the plan one last time. Every obstacle, every marker, and every minor detail had been placed to guide the man into understanding the error of his ways. Grandpa's grandchildren peeked out the window, eager to see what would happen. They had been part of the preparation, and their curiosity was growing by the minute. Grandpa waved at them, reassuring them that everything was under control. He reminded them to observe quietly and learn. There was a lot to gain from seeing problems solved with patience, cleverness, and calm determination. The family was ready, and so was Grandpa. He stepped outside to make final adjustments. He moved small cones, shifted harmless garden tools, and adjusted chalk markings so they were perfectly positioned. Every object had a purpose: to guide, to challenge, and to create awareness. He explained to his grandchildren how subtle changes could influence behavior without causing harm. It's not about punishment, he said. It's about teaching understanding in a way that lasts. The children nodded, absorbing the wisdom and enjoying the hands-on experience of seeing strategy in action. As the man entered the driveway, Grandpa watched with keen eyes. The car moved confidently, unaware of the small but deliberate obstacles awaiting him. Grandpa noticed the slight furrow in the man's brow as he saw the chalk lines and cones. The man hesitated, glanced around, and then tried to maneuver around them. Grandpa kept his distance, allowing the man to experience the first hints of mild inconvenience. It was important that the lesson came naturally, without interference. The man needed to realize his mistake through his own actions. Guided by the subtle signs Grandpa had placed, the man attempted to park closer to the garage, but the placement of the cones forced him to adjust carefully. Every movement was calculated, every hesitation noticed by Grandpa. The man's confidence began to waver, replaced by a growing awareness that this was not as simple as he had assumed. Grandpa observed silently, enjoying the unfolding lesson. He had learned over the years that people often understood their mistakes more clearly when they faced small, manageable challenges rather than being scolded outright. Grandpa's children watched from the porch, impressed by the subtlety of the plan. They could see the man's growing frustration, but they also noticed the clever guidance that prevented any real harm. Grandpa had designed everything to be safe, fair, and memorable. The man finally managed to park, slightly crooked and clearly uncomfortable. Grandpa approached calmly, walking at a leisurely pace to ensure the moment felt natural and not confrontational. "Good morning, Grandpa," said politely. "I see you have parked on our driveway. I must remind you that this is private property, and it is important to respect the space of others." The man looked up, startled by the calm and steady voice. He opened his mouth to respond, but Grandpa continued before he could make excuses. "I have placed some markers and obstacles to guide you today. They are harmless, but they are here to help you understand the importance of awareness and respect." The man looked around, noticing the cones and chalk lines more clearly. He hesitated, realizing that he had underestimated the situation. Grandpa smiled faintly, not in mockery, but in quiet satisfaction. The lesson was working exactly as planned. The man's confidence was being replaced by understanding, and he was beginning to see that actions have consequences. Grandpa explained further, gently but firmly, that respecting boundaries was essential for everyone in the neighborhood, and that ignoring rules could lead to unnecessary trouble. The man nodded slowly, a hint of humility in his expression. He realized that Grandpa was not angry, but wise and observant. This was the kind of lesson that left a lasting impression. Grandpa suggested a way for the man to make amends, a small act of cooperation, like helping with the garden or assisting in some minor household task. It was not a punishment, but a gesture of accountability. The man agreed, appreciating the fairness and wisdom behind the approach. Grandpa's grandchildren watched closely, fascinated by the interaction. They saw how patience, observation, and strategic thinking could resolve a difficult situation. Grandpa explained the importance of understanding human behavior and guiding people toward better choices without creating fear or resentment. The children were learning a lesson that went far beyond this single incident. They were witnessing the power of calm, authority, and clever problem solving. The neighbors who had been observing from across the street began to murmur and smile, impressed by Grandpa's approach. Some came closer to watch discreetly, curious about how the situation would unfold. Grandpa remained composed, focusing entirely on the man and the lesson at hand. There was no rush, no anger, just quiet, deliberate guidance. The man followed Grandpa's suggestions, moving carefully around the driveway and performing the small tasks assigned to him. It was a moment of reflection, learning, and understanding. As the morning progressed, the man's attitude shifted. He began to understand that ignoring rules and boundaries was not wise, and that respecting others' property was a fundamental part of community living. Grandpa's approach had allowed him to experience the consequences without humiliation, fostering understanding instead of resentment. The man completed the tasks, thanked Grandpa for the guidance, and even expressed appreciation for the clever and fair way the lesson had been delivered. Grandpa's family gathered around, proud of the outcome. They had seen patience, planning, and cleverness in action. The man had learned a valuable lesson in respect, and the neighborhood had witnessed a demonstration of wisdom, fairness, and human-centric problem-solving. Grandpa smiled quietly, satisfied that justice had been delivered without anger, conflict, or harm. The morning had transformed into a moment of learning for everyone involved, and the man would remember this day for a long time. By the afternoon, the car was gone, and the driveway was clear. Grandpa returned to his garden, tending to the flowers and enjoying the calm after the carefully orchestrated morning. The family reflected on the events, realizing that clever planning and observation often achieve more than anger or confrontation. The man had left with a lesson learned, humility gained, and a new understanding of respect and community. Grandpa's approach had turned a potential conflict into a memorable and positive experience for everyone involved, reinforcing the values of patience, wisdom, and fairness. The morning air was crisp, and Grandpa felt the familiar satisfaction of being prepared. Today the plan would reach its full effect. The man had returned to the neighborhood, confident as ever. Grandpa had made sure every subtle obstacle and guide was in place. As he stepped outside, his grandchildren followed quietly, eager to watch the events unfold. Grandpa reminded them to stay calm and observe, explaining that the best lessons often came from seeing patience and clever thinking in action. They nodded, understanding that this was more than a simple encounter. It was an opportunity to learn how to handle problems with intelligence and fairness. Grandpa approached the driveway, carefully watching the car move in. The man seemed oblivious to the arrangement of cones, chalk markings, and harmless obstacles that had been placed to guide him. Grandpa noticed the slight furrow in the man's brow, subtle sign that he was starting to perceive something different from his usual easy routine. Grandpa remained calm, speaking gently to himself as he observed. The man's confidence was beginning to waver, and Grandpa knew that patience would make this lesson stick far more effectively than anger ever could. The man attempted to park, maneuvering carefully around the subtle barriers. Each time he adjusted the car, he became slightly more aware that he was not in full control. Grandpa noted the small details, the way the man hesitated, the small glances around him, and the way his hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. All these details indicated that the man was beginning to grasp the situation. Grandpa smiled faintly, a quiet satisfaction running through him. He had planned everything to ensure the lesson was experienced, not told, and it was working beautifully. Grandpa's family watched from the porch, fascinated. They saw the subtle transformation happening. The man's initial arrogance was slowly giving way to careful attention. Grandpa explained to the grandchildren how small, strategic guidance could influence behavior without confrontation. He pointed out that the man was learning from the environment and from subtle cues rather than from being scolded or forced. The children listened intently, understanding the power of patience, observation, and clever planning. Grandpa stepped forward, addressing the man politely. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm and firm. "I see that you have parked on our driveway again. I must remind you that this is private property, and it is important to respect the space of others." The man looked up, slightly startled by the composed tone. Grandpa continued, explaining that the cones and chalk markings were placed to guide him and to help him. Understand the importance of awareness and respect." The man nodded slowly, beginning to comprehend the situation more clearly. Grandpa suggested a simple act of accountability. He offered the man an opportunity to assist with a small task in the garden. It was not a punishment, but a chance to show responsibility and understanding. The man hesitated at first, unsure how to respond. Grandpa remained patient, allowing him the space to reflect. After a brief pause, the man agreed, and they walked together to the garden. Grandpa guided him through the task, explaining the importance of cooperation and mutual respect. The man began to see the value of learning through action rather than through confrontation. The grandchildren observed closely, fascinated by the interaction. They saw how Grandpa's calm demeanor and strategic planning were transforming a potentially confrontational situation into a meaningful learning experience. Grandpa explained that understanding human behavior and providing opportunities for reflection were key to effective problem-solving. The children realized that this approach was far more impactful than anger or punishment, and they absorbed the lesson alongside the man. Neighbors began to notice the interaction and watched quietly from across the street. Some whispered to each other, impressed by Grandpa's methodical and fair approach. They saw a clever way of handling a difficult situation without creating conflict, and many nodded in appreciation. Grandpa remained composed, focused entirely on the man and the lesson being delivered. There was no rush, no pressure, just a steady, deliberate process that allowed understanding to develop naturally. As the morning progressed, the man's attitude shifted noticeably. He became more attentive, careful, and thoughtful. He realized that ignoring rules and boundaries had consequences, and that respecting others' property was an essential part of community life. Grandpa's gentle guidance and carefully structured obstacles had allowed him to experience this realization firsthand. The man completed the tasks in the garden, and a sense of humility and awareness began to replace his previous confidence. Grandpa had achieved exactly what he intended, a memorable lesson in respect and responsibility. The family joined in subtly, offering encouragement and support where needed. They observed how Grandpa balanced firmness with fairness, providing guidance without creating resentment. The children learned not just from the man's transformation, but from Grandpa's approach to leadership and problem-solving. He had shown them that intelligence, patience, and careful planning could resolve challenges effectively and fairly. The lesson extended beyond this single encounter, leaving an impression that would remain with the family for years. By mid-morning, the man had completed his assigned tasks, and Grandpa took a moment to reflect on the outcome. The car remained parked respectfully, and the man expressed genuine appreciation for the guidance he had received. Grandpa smiled quietly, satisfied that the lesson had been delivered successfully. The neighborhood continued to observe, many inspired by the way a potentially negative situation had been transformed into a constructive experience. Grandpa's calm, clever approach had not only solved the immediate problem, but it also demonstrated a model of respectful conflict resolution. The man prepared to leave. Visibly changed by the morning's events, he thanked Grandpa for the lesson and promised to respect the property in the future. Grandpa accepted the gratitude graciously, emphasizing the importance of awareness and community respect. The grandchildren watched in awe, realizing that wisdom often manifests through subtle action, careful observation, and strategic guidance. They had witnessed a transformation that extended beyond the man, shaping their own understanding of fairness and responsibility. As the car drove away, the driveway once again returned to its quiet state. Grandpa returned to his garden, tending to the flowers and enjoying the calm after the carefully orchestrated morning. The family reflected on the events, discussing the lessons learned about patience, observation, clever planning, and human behavior. They understood that this experience had reinforced values that would serve them well in future challenges. Grandpa's approach had shown that intelligence, calmness, and fairness could resolve problems in a memorable and impactful way. The neighborhood gradually returned to its usual rhythm, with conversations about the morning's events buzzing quietly among neighbors. Everyone recognized the ingenuity and fairness of Grandpa's approach. He had handled a difficult situation with patience, clever planning, and gentle guidance, turning a potential conflict into a meaningful lesson for the man, the family, and the community. The morning had been a masterclass in human-centric problem-solving, leaving everyone with insights into respect, accountability, and the power of subtle influence. Grandpa's calm authority and strategic thinking had ensured that the man would remember this lesson for years, and that the family had learned valuable skills in patience, observation, and fair leadership. The morning sunlight spilled across the neighborhood, gentle and warm, as Grandpa stepped out onto his porch. Today marked the final part of the lesson he had been preparing for. The car had appeared again, parked confidently on the driveway, as if the man had forgotten the subtle lessons from before. Grandpa took a deep breath, savoring the calm of the morning, and sipped his tea. He knew that today the man would truly understand the importance of respect, and it would be a lesson he would never forget. The family gathered quietly around him, sharing in the anticipation and quietly trusting Grandpa's careful plan. Grandpa observed the man in the car, who was scrolling through his phone, seemingly unaware of the world around him. Grandpa's eyes twinkled with a quiet sense of satisfaction. This was the moment he had been waiting for. Everything had been prepared over the past days: the markers, the cones, the subtle guidance that would lead the man to realize his mistake naturally. Grandpa knew that direct confrontation would be less effective than a carefully orchestrated experience, where the man could learn through action. He motioned for his grandchildren to observe from a safe distance. reminding them to pay attention to every detail. The man began to maneuver the car toward the garage, unaware of the carefully planned obstacles in his path. As he moved, he hesitated slightly, noticing the chalk lines and small cones for the first time. Grandpa's calm presence gave the man no reason to panic. But the subtle changes in the environment were enough to prompt awareness. Grandpa quietly instructed his grandchildren to note the man's reactions, emphasizing the importance of observing behavior and learning how small adjustments can influence understanding. The children were fascinated, watching the man slowly realize that he could not simply ignore rules and boundaries. Grandpa stepped forward, greeting the man politely. "Good morning again," he said, his voice calm and steady. "I see you are parked on our driveway once more. I hope you understand that this is private property and it is important to respect the space of others." The man looked up, slightly startled, realizing that Grandpa's calm authority left no room for argument. Grandpa continued, explaining that the obstacles were placed to guide him, not to punish, but to help him recognize the importance of attention and respect. The man's initial confidence wavered, placed by a dawning awareness that he had underestimated the situation. Grandpa suggested a way for the man to make amends. It was a simple task, helping with some minor chores in the garden. It was not a punishment, but a chance to demonstrate accountability and cooperation. The man hesitated, unsure of how to respond, but Grandpa remained patient, allowing him space to think. The man nodded slowly, agreeing to participate. Grandpa led him to the garden, explaining each task calmly and clearly, demonstrating the importance of thoughtful action and attention to detail. The man began to engage, his previous arrogance replaced by humility and a growing understanding of responsibility. Grandpa's family observed the interaction, fascinated by the transformation. They saw the man's attitude shift from careless confidence to thoughtful participation. Grandpa explained to his grandchildren that this was a powerful lesson in respect, accountability, and human behavior. He emphasized that people often learn best through experience rather than confrontation, and this approach allowed the man to grasp the lesson without feeling humiliated. The children absorbed the lesson, understanding that wisdom, patience, and careful guidance could resolve difficult situations effectively. Neighbors began to watch discreetly from across the street, intrigued by the unfolding events. Some whispered in admiration, impressed by Grandpa's clever and fair method. Grandpa remained composed, focused on the man and the lesson being delivered. He allowed the man to complete his tasks at his own pace, emphasizing reflection and understanding rather than speed. The man worked carefully, guided by Grandpa's subtle instructions, and slowly began to comprehend the value of respecting others and following rules. As the morning progressed, the man's demeanor changed noticeably. He became more attentive, careful, and aware of his surroundings. Grandpa smiled quietly, recognizing that the lesson had taken root. The man finished the tasks, thanked Grandpa sincerely, and expressed appreciation for the fair and thoughtful way the lesson had been delivered. Grandpa nodded, reinforcing the importance of awareness and community respect. This moment marked a significant transformation, not only for the man, but also for the family and the neighborhood, who witnessed the power of calm guidance and strategic planning. The family gathered around Grandpa after the man left. Reflecting on the events, they discussed the value of patience, observation, clever planning, and human understanding. The children shared what they had noticed about the man's reactions. Grandpa explained how subtle guidance and structured experiences could influence behavior positively. They realized that this experience had not only resolved a potential conflict, but also provided lasting lessons in respect, responsibility, and fairness. Grandpa returned to his garden, tending to the flowers with a sense of calm satisfaction. The morning's events had reinforced the values of patience, clever problem-solving, and human-centric guidance. The man had left with a deeper understanding of respect and accountability. The family had learned invaluable lessons in observing, planning, and guiding others. The neighborhood gradually returned to its normal rhythm. But the story of the morning would linger in conversations for years to come. Grandpa's approach had demonstrated that challenges could be resolved with intelligence, patience, and fairness. The man had learned a memorable lesson in respect. and the family had witnessed the effectiveness of thoughtful, strategic action. The morning had been a testament to the power of human-centric problem-solving, showing that subtle guidance, clear communication, and calm authority could transform a potentially confrontational situation into a constructive and meaningful experience. By afternoon, the driveway was quiet once more. Grandpa sat on the porch, enjoying the warmth of the sun and the peace that had returned to the neighborhood. The family joined him, reflecting on the lessons learned. They understood that respect, accountability, and awareness were values that extended far beyond this single incident. Grandpa's careful, clever approach had turned a simple problem into an opportunity for growth, understanding, and connection. Everyone involved had gained something valuable, and the man would carry the lesson with him for years. Shaped by the quiet wisdom and strategic thinking of Grandpa, who had turned a moment of disrespect into a lasting memory of fairness and understanding,